Is this a Cold War?
I don't think it is a Cold War in the classic sense, because actually both China, the United States and the Western world are far too involved with each other to have the kind of real separation that you had in the Cold War, where economic systems didn't combine and where political systems were almost wholly opposed without any kind of interaction. But I think one of the other reasons actually comes from some of the more interesting statistics that lie under the surface of this language. And first of all, just to say, it is worth noting there are Chinese diplomats, very skilled Chinese diplomats, like Ambassador to the United States, Cui Tiankai, like Vice Foreign Minister Madame Fu Ying, who actually speak in much more measured tones even now and seem sometimes explicitly to say that this kind of very aggressive diplomacy isn't necessarily doing China a great deal of good in the world. So it's worth noting that even China's own representatives sometimes speak in different voices. But let me just give you one statistic, which is very, very significant for the fact that we're on France 24. Recently, opinion polling by a Western company, Ipsos Mori, that was allowed to operate inside China, found that France currently had an 81% favorable rating amongst the Chinese middle class people who were surveyed. The United Kingdom also actually had a very high rating in the high 80s, but France, you'll be pleased to hear, came top. What does this mean? It means that lots of ordinary middle-class Chinese people like our friend Beishan here, who I'm sure is going to have something to say, of course are nationalistic. Of course they feel proud of their country. Sometimes some of them use this pretty intemperate language. But at the same time, they also recognize a lot that is good about the West. They're still interested in living there, in being educated there, in doing business there. And I have to say, the one thing that would likely cause a real riot in the street in China is not about democracy. It will be about if the government ever forbade the Chinese middle classes from sending their kids to be educated in America, in Canada, in Australia, in France, in Germany, and in Britain. So the attitudes towards the West, of course, have a lot of this very fierce rhetoric. But when you look at the statistics about what people really think, where they put their money, where they put their children, the story turns a little bit different.
Yeah, but are we perhaps at a turning point now?
Well, I think that a lot of this language is turning in some very different directions. And I mentioned before, Germany's been mentioned. The fact that one of the targets for sanctions is MERIX, a very well-respected think tank based in Berlin that writes on China. It doesn't have any interference within China itself. It just writes reports. That's a very bad sign, because that suggests that then basically what the Chinese write about the West and what the West write about China can be the subject of objection by either government. And free speech and free exchange of views on both sides mean that that can't be accepted. Our friend Beishan, I'm sure, would want to be free in Canada or France or Britain to say exactly what she thinks about the West, even when she's going to have to tell us things we don't want to hear. That's fine. But it also means that on the Western side, we have to be able to free to tell our friends in China sometimes when we think they're getting it wrong, and they're very free to disagree. If we don't have that point of agreement, then yes, that will be an important turning point, because it means that a civilized dialogue in which both sides agree that sometimes we will disagree and we will call each other out for doing what we think is wrong is no longer possible. That would be a very dangerous turning point. I hope we're not at that point, and that we step back from these sanctions against individuals and in particular against think tankers.